All right, looks like we're recording. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. So as always, we're going to start this meeting with roll call. If you are on the council, can you please put your name in the chat? If you are subbing in for someone who's on the council, then put your name in the chat as well, and which organization you are representing. So for this meeting, what we're going to be doing is starting where we left off. At our last meeting, if you recall, we were doing an exercise on what needs to be clarified in regulation. So at the last meeting, we had gotten through the definitions, and we're just going to continue trudging through the legislation, and then that will allow my team and us to focus on what the stakeholders are concerned about, and then we can address those issues in regulation. So any questions on that? Okay, seeing none, we will move on. So since we finished with the definitions, the next part is the General Assembly intent. Was there anything that that we need to clarify in regulation or guidance? There's other places to clarify items as well in the General Assembly's intent. And just as a note, when we are developing our regulations, this will be a helpful guide for us, and we're certainly going to be keeping these items in mind. All right, I don't see any questions, so we can move down. All right. Any questions on this section? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to the next section. So this is really just setting up the authority and who does what. So this is the purpose of the advisory council. There were some items that were added, and then note here, we no longer have a limit of 21 members to the advisory council. So we do have the opportunity to add more folks to the advisory council. Any questions on that?
I have a question, Brad. What's the method by which you would request to become a member of the council?
Yeah, so typically what we do is we have, when we did it last time, we had letters. So we would receive letters, and then once we know that there's an interest for someone to be on the advisory council, there's a form that our secretary's office will send out to the applicant, and then that would ultimately be our secretary's decision.
Okay,
so if you are
just so I understand, write a letter and send it to, and who would that be sent to?
It would typically, people were sending it to Tyler before. Now that Tyler's gone, that would probably be Rick Kessler.
Okay. Would someone be kind enough to put that email in the chat?
I put the MDE EPR email in there, Brad, as an opportunity.
Yeah, and that works as well. You can send it. You can send it there as well, and we can make sure that it gets to the right people.
Okay, thank you. And real quick, I just want to say hi. My name's Mick Arnold. I don't know where Michael came from. That's what my mother calls me when I'm in trouble. I'm the president of Arnold Packaging, so I've been really excited to see what you guys are working on. And we're a 92-year-old manufacturer and distributor of packaging materials. So I am excited to be here and understand the progress so far.
All right, sounds good. Thank you very much. Okay. All right, and then another change in the law. MDE is going to be added as a non-voting member to the council. So we're currently deciding, trying to figure out if that's going to be the director, if we're going to delegate that. We're working through that. And then the producer is also going to be a non-voting member of the advisory council. Any questions on that? Doesn't seem like there needs to be much clarification on that. All right. Okay, so this is getting into the roles of, or the role of the advisory council itself. Any questions on this section? About process also. All right, Chris.
So is there a deadline to submit these, Brad, or is it just ongoing?
A deadline to submit which part? The
For the recommendations.
The recommendations for advisory council members, or
Yes,
recommendations
yes,
for
advisory council members. Sorry for not clarifying. Yeah.
Oh, okay, for advisory council members. Well, I think the effective date of this was June 1st, if I recall. But so as soon as possible, if you do have recommendations, and then just so that we can make sure that we're getting, they have as much or have as many months to participate in this time as possible.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, Martha.
Yeah, actually, I have a question of your other interpretation of his question is, what is the deadline for giving you feedback on these regulations and what the regulations need to do? Because it's kind of, I wasn't anticipating exactly what we were going to do this time, and on further study, maybe in 24 hours, I may reflect on them.
Yeah. So this was, we did start this exercise last time. There's a lot of states that are going through and developing programs, and there's a lot of lessons learned. So this is the opportunity to kind of take some of those learning from those states, and we're going to have to start drafting regulations in short order. So this is the advisory's council's opportunity to provide input into what they would like to see in those regulations.
And what time frame? Can we just send you something in writing as well? And what time frame would you need those?
Yeah, so we're happy to receive anything in writing, but for transparency, and if you're on the council, we would like to have the conversation here as well. So, but we're happy to accept anything.
Okay, no, it's pretty short. It wasn't really my expectation, so it was kind of, I wasn't sure what we were going to do, and it's hard to react to this in real time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I could copy it to everyone on the advisory council too.
Yeah, and that would be good as well. Maybe that's a good way of doing it, just to make sure that everyone is kind of getting the same information as well.
And is that deadline July 1st or August or what? When do you get them?
So we are going to start drafting as soon as we're done with this exercise, but we're going to continue to have these advisory council meetings where we can get further input. CAA in our next meeting is going to be doing a presentation on best management practices that they're seeing in other states, and then we can certainly loop in other presentations as well.
Okay. So as soon as possible is the answer.
Yes, because and just there's a critical deadline in for July 1st, 2026. That is when the registration of producers needs to happen, and a part of that is the producers need to register by brand by covered material, and typically the covered materials list, or and our goal is to put that into regulation. So we do have a pretty tight time frame.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Eileen.
But Bradley, honestly, most people, I would guess, at least I'm speaking for myself, I have a lot of as soon as possibles right now.
Sure. Yeah.
So could you please, I mean, in order to prioritize the as soon as possibles,
Yes.
and I'm like Martha, I've written regulations, I've dealt with regulations. I think it's best in terms of getting a better outcome to let people think a little and not on the fly, and maybe the issue is for people to be able to take a little bit of time and solidify or conceptualize, get their thoughts together, and then have a meeting. If you want everything discussed out, great. But I think for me, I need to gather my thoughts more in order to be able to kind of contribute to a good discussion like that. So two things. One is, can you hone in a little bit more on a deadline for us? Knowing that we're all really busy. This is not the only thing that we work on by any stretch. But then also, can you think about you and Shannon and Dave, all the MDE folks, can you think about, for the benefit of improving the outcome, if you could build in time for all the EPR council members to be able to go through, solidify, and then maybe have one of these meetings be that kind of, or, whatever, a conversation discussion.
The snail's faster than a slug. I gotta win. Snails usually move slowly.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we can take a look at. So we can take that back and talk about a deadline for that. We did talk about this last meeting also, but I understand that there is definitely a lot going on, even with the legislative session winding down. So yeah, that's definitely something that we can take a look at. And maybe for next meeting we can, and 2 meetings ago we did talk about a timeline. So it might be good to maybe take a look at that and what some of these interim milestones are going to need to be. But since we have a pretty tight time frame, I'm probably going to have my team start drafting the regulations in the next month or so. But that doesn't necessarily mean we still can't receive input on those as well. So because it does take some time to do the drafting as well. Yeah, and Rick, did you have anything that that you wanted to talk about
Hey, sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to reinforce the part you said. I hear Eileen, and that makes a lot of sense to me. But I also want to just back you up on the idea that we do have to implement this, and we're on a tight time frame to start putting this together. So I just, not setting, Bradley's in charge, not really trying to put a hammer down, but just remind you that LMA has an obligation to get this moving. So thanks.
Yeah, and as we mentioned in our last meeting, we've been looking at the other states and their covered materials list. We've been doing our own site visits at various different retailers to try and hone in that covered materials list as well, because that's going to be a very crucial part of this next phase. Chaz, you had a question?
Yeah, could you share your tight time frame on regulations, et cetera?
Yes. So we did talk about a higher level time frame in one of our previous meetings, but we can certainly send that out to folks.
Thank you.
Yes. All right. I thought I saw another question as well.
Scott can't ask the question, Brad, because he's at an operating plant. He said, if the first critical deadline is covered materials reporting July 1, 2026, then we should have a 2 to 3 hour meeting dedicated to covered materials lists.
I think that would be great. And once we have, I think that would be great as well. I know CAA's meeting next, or I think they were planning on maybe doing 20 or 30 minutes on best management practices. But yeah, I definitely would want to do a meeting on the covered materials list. Shoshana?
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm hoping to get some more clarity on the deadlines. In our reading of the law, it seemed like 2027 was the deadline for the covered materials category list. So want to get just some more clarity around 2026.
So there's two. Yeah, so there's two lists. There's the covered materials list, and then there's the covered materials list that are curbside recyclable. And I think which is a subset of the covered materials list. And that, I think that is the one that is in 2027, but the 2026 deadline with the registration, which would include all covered materials, whether or not they can be collected on the curbside or not, is July 1st, 2026, because the producers have to register through CAA by brand, by covered material. So we need that we need that broader list a little bit sooner. All right. Any other questions on that? Peter?
Yeah, maybe Brad on timeline, I can help. I mean, so if we look at, and I think it's the next section, but if we look at the requirements for July 1st, 2026, essentially the pro needs to submit producers, a list of brands, and covered materials. So back ourselves up from that, we need time to be able to verify the information that producers have provided us. We need time for producers to actually report that data to us. We need time for the development of the registry that producers are going to report into. So there's a bunch of steps that need to happen before that July 1st deadline. So, ideally you need a number of months before that July 1st deadline. So if there are regulations that set out some of those requirements that provide us data. For example, item 3, a list of covered materials. I don't know what that means right now as to what MDE would want for that. So we need that information ahead of us setting up the registry. So all the IT that needs to go into that side, and then, you know, guidance for producers, and then reporting, verification, and then submission. So you are looking at a number of months that's going to take to get those pieces in place.
Yeah, and Peter, I remember you bringing up before, does this include tonnages for this list right here? And oh man, this AI thing keeps getting in the way. So at least reading the it's a list at this point. So and then the tonnages and goals and all that stuff I think would come later. But this is, I think the intent of this is really just to who is in scope and which of their products are in scope as well.
So the question will be on this one, which is, what does that mean? Are we asking people high level? Do you supply glass into the marketplace, flexible plastics, rigid plastics? Is it like really detailed list? Is it like, you know, HDPE bottles? Like, what level of detail is the state asking for? Because that will impact the complication for us to sort of.
Yeah, understood. And so it says covered material list right here. So, or covered materials. So I think Oregon and Colorado have 60, California has something like 90. So it seems like it would be like at that level of reporting. Chaz, I think you had something.
Well, I think Peter's raised some fascinating points, and I'm wondering, Peter, if y'all have like a timeline of how long it takes to get that information based on experience so far, and how that would then fit in with MDE's requirements or needs.
So if we're not needing tonnage in that initial report, Chaz, that may reduce some of our run-up time, in the sense of when you start to get into tonnages, you get a lot more questions from producers that will have questions around, you know, guidance around how do we take into account certain aspects. You know, the fact that, you know, I give the example of paper products, which I think based on the definition right now could include wallpaper and furnace filters and, you know, playing cards or Monopoly money. You know, so we need those types of, you know, information definitions ahead of time to be able to provide. But we do need time. We do need some time to set up the IT system. You know, usually in Colorado, I think we've given 2 months for our reporting window that provides producers time to report things in. You know, time to get the guidance in place to make sure producers know what they're supposed to do and how to do it. So we will need a number of months ahead of time to get us to it. And I think I was suggesting, I think we could try to walk through some of those steps that are needed.
Yeah. And
considerations on those.
And Peter,
Thank you.
Peter, you may need some of those for your purposes, those tonnage requirements, to see if they are a de minimis producer or not. So, and whether they need to register in the first place. So that, but if it's pretty obvious, yeah, but right now this just says list right here, but we can maybe have a further conversation on that.
Yep.
All right. Michael, you had a question? And then we can just keep things moving. We can also probably ask questions in the chat as well, just so that we can kind of keep things moving forward.
Yeah, I just had a quick add on to Peter, because the definition of paper, we mentioned wallpaper and any number of things that are very, very broad right now. you might have to leave additional time. Let's just say if you were to narrow that to consider things that are curbside recyclable, and you might ask for a certification from Western Michigan or something along those lines, producers would need time to be able to acquire some of that as well. So just a thought, if you're going to require some outside certifications from existing third-party bodies.
Yeah, understood. Okay. Just sorry, Shoshana, am I saying that right?
You are. It was perfect, Bradley.
Okay.
Just one quick point and then a question. I recently heard a talk from Jeff at Fielco at CAA saying the most powerful tool in EPR right now is to give things time. So I just want to bring that point to our discussions as we're thinking through this regulatory process. Is to get good EPR, we need the time to get the correct data and to make sure we have everything in place and aligned to make it as effective as possible. So just want to put that thought out there. And then Bradley, I'm curious to know what the research and reach out that you've done to other state departments and CAA that have done this regulatory work for EPR has been like, because I know, for example, Colorado has had a very robust process for doing that.
Yeah. So a few things. We're definitely in communication with the other states that are going before us to try and glean some lessons learned from them. We also participate in some other groups. Like I know the Recycling Partnership has a monthly meeting where they are talking through some of these items. And we participated in the PSI harmonization exercise that was a week or two ago, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. And then, of course, these meetings here are the opportunities for the advisory council to exactly right here to make recommendations. We kind of passed over the roles of the advisory council, but there's definitely an opportunity, and it's also in law for the advisory council to give recommendations on pretty much all aspects of this program.
Awesome. Thanks, Bradley.
Yeah. And just another item, when we do get to the regulations, there is a legally required public participation process where stakeholders can provide comments, and then we have to respond to each one of those. So not only is there an opportunity to provide input through these meetings right here, but once we publish the draft regulations, there's a robust public participation process where anyone and everyone can comment on those draft regulations, and we would have to respond to those. All right, Tiffany.
Hi, Bradley. Just in the interest of kind of moving through the bill today, maybe we can just go through the bill, through the remaining sections of the bill. You tell us what kind of feedback you're looking for, the time frame that you want it, and then you can schedule like the next one if we're doing covered materials. Then we all show up prepared. You have best practices, what you guys might be considering, and then we bring our feedback to that meeting.
And we've already talked a little bit about what the covered materials conversation is going to look like. So I think we're probably going to start with what the other states have done, and then whether there's gaps or opportunities, challenges with those, and if there's potentially some additional covered materials that need to be added, because we do have paper products, which not all the states have those as well. So we just need to think about what does that look like in the scope of this program. And Peter already pointed out that there's some interesting paper products that are out there. All right. Yeah. So just with that in mind, with what Tiffany said, so I think for let me move down right here. So for this registration right here, we've talked a little bit about this, and we've talked and CAA has talked through some of the challenges of that, but what we're looking for is what should this registration look like? Is it just a list of brands and covered materials? Is it something else? Is there more to it? And then we also have contact information for that. All right, Peter.
Brad, I'm assuming, but I probably shouldn't always, that so the pro will be expending funds at this point. So with registration, is there the ability for the pro to charge fees to producers based on that initial compliance period?
So that's definitely a good question. What have they done in other states for the startup? Because the money doesn't start flowing until closer to the plan approval. So how does that look like in other states?
Yeah, I think Minnesota, they'll see fees starting right at registration.
Okay.
So the pro has some funds to be able to address issues, because I think, there is in this a piece that we are providing funds to, or providing a fee to the department. And there will be obviously IT costs that'll come into place already for setting up the registry and everything else. So there are costs that the pro are spending during this period. So I think in Minnesota, the contemplation that will at the start potentially be revenue based.
Yeah, and I can talk a little bit about, because Paint Care is another program that just started in Maryland, and for the startup costs, and this may not necessarily work, but they received a loan from the producers, which they would pay back over time. The Paint Care would pay that back to the producers over time. So that's how they were able to cover the startup costs for Paint Care. And then once we approve the plan, then that's when the fees start to happen for point of sale. So that's when the actual revenue would start to come in. So there's probably a lot of ways to get that revenue, but that's at least one other model that we've seen on how that happens.
I think you're talking though about a scale of producers that's quite a bit different.
That's true. That is true.
Producers in the paint space than there is in the packaging space. So
yeah,
I think there will be concerns from producers about potentially having to subsidize the program until it's officially approved, which is a couple of years down the road.
Yeah, and just to tie into that, I mean, we're going to be developing regulations like very soon, and our costs are covered for that. There's also the needs assessment as well. So, yeah, that's definitely an important part of the conversation, the cash flow conversation, which is always, there's a saying, cash flow is king. So, yeah, it's, besides Minnesota, how did some of the other states, cover, or how is the pro covering the startup costs in the other states? You mentioned Minnesota, what they're doing.
Yeah, I think there's different timelines associated with some of the different programs. So I think there's a bit of a longer, a more helpful stretch ramp up in Minnesota, Maryland, and Washington. Colorado's was relatively quick. So the producers, the core founding members of CA have helped to fund that process ahead of time, but there is a bandwidth perspective here as more and more states come online. You're asking a small group of producers to potentially subsidize all of the startups of that can become problematic over time.
Yeah, understood. And I don't know if there's anything that prevents the pro from charging fees now, but the official fee comes with the plan, and then we approve that, and that's 3 years down the line. So I definitely understand the concern there, and we're hearing much more interest in some of the other states as well.
And Brad,
yeah,
Brad,
go ahead.
The people who actually have to pay these fees, who for the most part are totally separate from the PRO board, they might be a tad annoyed about having paying fees to a group they have no relationship for a program that does not yet exist. I think you got a political problem.
Yeah, and that is this might be something that we have to maybe have a separate conversation on, considering that the plan isn't going to be submitted until 3 years from now. But yeah, it definitely seems like that there may be some cash flow issues. But again, there's nothing here that prevents the pro from charging a fee for some of those startup costs.
Hey, Brad, this is Mike.
Yes.
I think this is a very sensitive matter, and Peter knows that. So what I would ask is that we take this and just have a discussion on how we might loop in the manufacturers, because you just can't go to them and say, hey, start paying now. But I think the state to endorse whatever path forward. So it might be a discussion to have with Peter and just to really align on the best way to do it, and maybe with some of the manufacturers that are not yet part of CAA. So Peter, I think that's a conversation that should be offline, and then we can bring it here. But it shouldn't stop the rulemaking from going on.
Yes, agreed on that. Okay. Moving on. So we have in this part right here, there's an ability to designate another pro. Any comments on this part of the law? Things that we need to think about as we're going through this. I know we have already received, and it's not necessarily this part right here, we've already received a request for an alternative collection system, which is kind of tied in to this. So I guess that might be a good conversation for the alternative collection systems. what is that looking like in some of the other states? Is there anything that we can rip off and deploy? Are there any lessons learned in those? Do other countries have some of those as well? So just opening up the conversation on that. And this section on adding an additional pro. Peter?
So there's a process in place in Colorado right now that allows for, and again, they call them different things in different states, but they do allow for a process. So there is one in place that is allowing for the lubricant, I'm going to get it wrong, management or lubricant packaging manufacturing or management association, LPMA, to be able to move forward with, they're moving forward with a separate program to collect automotive packaging and lubricant related packaging, so that there is a process already in Colorado. I think the importance is to have some kind of a set out process. And I'm not sure the legislation really includes a process of how an alternative program would be, or producer responsibility organization would be accepted. So may need to be a little bit more clarity in the regulations around how that is put in place and potentially approved then.
Yeah, and I'm just going to move down to that on or after. I think this is it right here. An alternative collection program. So in the other states, if they have an alternative, and Shannon, I'll let you go.
I was just gonna, since again, Scott can't speak, I'm offering to speak right now. His comment is the quote alternative definition in Maryland may also have to do the work of community drop-off systems, as the definition of curbside lists doesn't include community drop-off depots, that is.
So as long as drop-off, community drop-off isn't specifically excluded from that, that might be something that we can handle in regulation as well, to make that a little bit more inclusive. But that's definitely a good thing to point out, Scott. For the alternative collection programs in other states, does that mean lower fees? Does that mean different goals? How does the reporting change? If and just because I know there's a lot of people that have been a part of those conversations, how does the reporting fees and goals look like for these alternative collection programs?
So Brad, if I can, it varies by state right now. So there is a fair amount of difference. I notice Tristan is on the phone or on the call, and from LPMA, he can talk to, I think, specifically the difference. I know he's not a council member, but he can probably speak better to the differences between states. So I think we are trying to figure that out. There's not a clear process necessarily laid out in each of the states.
Yeah, Peter, to that point, I mean, there's several states like Maryland that have this alternative collection program sort of component to it. I agree that Colorado doesn't use that terminology, but we've sort of worked it through the IPP system. And the idea here is that because in our case, the lubricant materials can't be collected curbside or in a blue bin, it warrants something separate. And that program, the LPMA program, is a large group of producers that are in that industry that are sort of creating a separate, for lack of a better term, an infrastructure. So it involves both collection, logistics, recycling to the end markets. The fees are based on whatever it takes to make that work. I agree. There's probably going to be some variability from state to state based upon what the current infrastructure is, but that does in some cases include municipalities, depots, community collections, a myriad of different things. So yeah, there might be some variability from state to state, but the idea is that because this is so different and it is a priority for this industry, we're kind of looking at managing it separately. If it would be appropriate, Peter, maybe from CAA's perspective, we could sort of model what was done in Colorado and just sort of use that as recommended language for Maryland.
Yeah, and we're certainly taking those recommendations. Also, just want to point out that this is an incentive right now to have an alternative collection program to wholly or in part offset the producer's payment obligations under this title, but they shall improve and provide a dedicated program for the applicable covered material. So the question is, what does improve mean? Adding one collection point may be technically an improvement, but what goals or convenience standards would we need to put in to regulation? I guess that's what we're looking for.
And we can make, yeah, and Brett, we can make recommendations for that. So accessibility, some places, like in Canada, for example, use population densities to make it accessible to certain points, or at a minimum, every county's got one. So yeah, we can make recommendations that seem reasonable, and then if you want to base statutes on accessibility per population density or something, that makes total sense.
Yeah. And I guess, are there other materials that could have an alternative collection system? I know when we were developing the needs assessment, and we've had conversations in this group as well, the thin films might not be the best things to put through a MRF, and that might be more of a drop-off model. So there's definitely some opportunities there could be some opportunities to have alternative collection systems for materials that typically or shouldn't necessarily go through a MRF, whether that's single or dual stream.
And just my take on it is there's going to be a lot of variability in groups that may want to do an ACP. So if, as the regulations are drafted, focus on the outcomes that you're looking for. And if you give the different groups the flexibility to create the program, as long as they're achieving those outcomes, I think that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, and that's why I brought up the goals, and technically adding one collection spot is technically improvement, but we need to understand what those convenience standards are going to be. And pain care has convenience standards, and some other EPR laws have those as well.
Yeah,
so
they're a good model. We talk to them too and understand their so yeah, we apply some of the similar approaches.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, was there another item? Okay. So moving along, we have another critical deadline in the law right here, July 1st, 2028. So before we were talking about the registration that needed to happen, this is the meat and potatoes of the producer responsibility. This is the plan itself that gets submitted to us. So I know the needs assessment was intended to inform of what was going to go into the plan. As we discussed, I think it was 2 meetings ago, there were differences between the needs assessment and what was actually negotiated in the law. Peter, I think CAA is planning another round of surveys to try and maybe fill in the gaps or better understand the cost of the program as it relates to the law that was passed. What's some of the thinking there?
Sorry, Brad, around the types of additional studies that we'll need to do?
Yeah, studies, surveys, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some gaps currently. So I think we're currently assessing what was in the initial needs assessment and what we're currently missing. And obviously there'll be a need to get information, some information a little closer to the actual timeline. So I think we're looking at that right now because there's a potential costs on a bunch of these things and understanding the marketplace. And also, you know, bluntly, we may need some of the clarifications through the regulation before undertaking some of that, because some of it I think still remains a bit of a question mark.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think one of the big items is, at least on the packaging side, we made the assumption in the needs assessment that commercial packaging was going to be in scope. And so there's obviously cost implications that are associated with that. That seems like it would be a major change in terms of the cost of EPR.
And Brad, if I just in this section under 3.1, I understand that producers technically can't sell or offer for sale. That piece right there. I guess my question is, what is that sort of required in a certain time? Is there requirements or is there potential penalties for producers, for example, not registering with the pro as of the first date, which we talked about, which is July 1st?
Yeah. So this is a date that is established in regulation. So if I'm understanding correctly, and we can open this up to the group, when should the sale prohibition occur? Is that with the registration? Is that with the plan approval? Is that with when reporting happens? I guess opening that up to the group, what have we seen in other states, and what would be appropriate for the state that we're going to be putting in regulation?
So I guess maybe I'll start, Brad. I think what we've seen in other states to some extent is that this is required after the program plan, and that does create some issues because there's no potential impetus. And this has been an issue, I think, in different material sets. When the date is set after, a producer isn't incented to register report ahead of time. So ideally this is set earlier in the process, whether it's not being allowed to sell or distribute, or potentially just the ability for enforcement, some type of enforcement by the regulator. Otherwise, again, you're asking the pro to do things that it doesn't have a way to compel actions from producers.
Yeah, and we've talked a little bit about this. I mean, we are doing our retail site visits right now. Those site visits are going to turn into compliance inspections at some point. So there isn't necessarily, and yeah, so that would be one way to capture that information. Peter, I think you've also talked about in other states, if a producer registers late, they're charged the full amount from when the fees would have started and not just when they started registering. What does that process look like in some of the other states?
Yeah, so usually that's dealt with through the pro's agreement with the producer. So it's not dealt with in legislation, it's dealt with.
I see. Okay.
Pro's agreement with the producer.
Okay. Understood. All right. Moving on, now we're getting into the details of what needs to be in the producer responsibility plan right here. We talked a little bit about some of the dates and the sale prohibition, but now we're getting into the details of the plan. Shoshana?
Hi, I just want to offer in that last conversation that I think producers do need time to make sure that they can meet all of the requirements. So to keep that in perspective as we are going through these states. And I don't think we quite know the effect of distribution sales ban yet in other states. So just keeping that in mind that there's a lot that's been put out there, but we haven't been able to see the true effects yet.
Yeah. So how many states actually have a sale prohibition right now?
I think California just banned it. It's the polystyrene. I'm not sure if there are other states as well, if others have more information on that.
And we do have bans, but for separate laws also. So it might not. Was that a part of the EPR or was that just for polystyrene? And I know you're the paper representative, so you might not know, but
I do not know that quite off the top of my head.
Yeah, I guess that begs, and so we had some perspectives on when the sale prohibition should be put in place. Are there any other thoughts on that? Is it with registration? Is it with the plan?
I think it's just the larger thought that folks need time to be able to comply and get ready for all of these. So as we're going through this process, to make sure that that is properly in there and that it's clear on where those obligations lie. And is it CAA who's going to be doing that work? Is it MDE who's setting things? I think folks just need clarity to be able to comply.
Yes, and we do have to put a date in regulation. So I'm hearing producers may need some time, and Peter, you were saying it would be better to have it earlier in the process, and that's before the pro or before the plan gets submitted, or when what was you thinking on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're requiring the pro to include a list of producers that are participating in the program as of July 1st of 2026, then there needs to be some ability to compel producers to actually.
Yes. Okay, I see.
6.
Okay.
So, I mean, certainly that doesn't necessarily need to be a ban on that supplying, but there needs to be some type of ability for, to compel producers to report as part of the program or register.
Yes. Andrew, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just was going to offer, I think there is a big difference between a ban on sale and compelling and creating a legal obligation to register. I think we would support, it's similar to other places, early registration compelling. Yeah, I think we'd support Peter in that comment, but I think there was maybe some confusion about a ban. The California polystyrene ban was separate to just polystyrene. That was almost a separate bill. It was included in the EPR bill. But there are, bans on sale normally when the plan becomes effective. So when the plan has to operate, that is when the ban on sale, if you haven't participated in the plan by that point in time, is compelling.
Yes, and we have our own polystyrene food service ban as well, and Shannon just put the link to that into the chat as well. All right, so all good discussion. So looking at this right here, we're starting to get into the details of what is included in the plan. Again, looks like it's a reiteration of what was in the registration. Right here, there's also goals. Yeah, I think this would be a good time to talk about the goals and the different perspectives on what the goals should be, whether they're put in regulation, whether they're included in the pros plan. What do those look like? What happens when producers don't meet those goals? Opening it up to the group on, we're talking specifically about the goals. And these are the goals. There's 7 of them, I believe. Recycling rates, composting rates, reuse rates, return rates, percentage of covered materials to be waste reduced. There's a PCR goal in here, and then greenhouse gas reduction goals. Kaz?
I think for a start, well, everybody wants aspirational goals. The history of recycling is littered with failed aspirational goals. We have to set serious goals that are achievable but are based in fact. We have to avoid rosy scenario assumptions about increased recycling. And when it comes to recycled content, I think we have to take into account the reality of entropy every time a material gets recycled, and the existence of competing non-packaging markets, just for a start. In other words, you got to take these goals seriously instead of just making them throw a number at the wall and see what catches.
Yeah, and I think how we're thinking about it is the goals need to be aggressive yet reasonable.
Now, aggressive goals are great, but they tend to fail. People are people.
Peter?
Yeah, I mean, given the fact that we potentially may face a $250,000 fine every year if we don't meet the targets, I think we want to make sure that they're grounded. I think so. Some of these are defined. How you measure them are defined in the legislation. There still is some issues. The difference between a durable product and a reusable product is still not well defined. But I think some of them are defined in the legislation. Some of them are not. How they would be measured, but I think. Given some of the complications with these, I think these may be better defined as part of the program plan and discussed with this group for feedback to set them properly. There's going to be potentially some issues as we started to think about sort of how to properly measure them without potentially being overly burdensome. I look at the composting rates, given compostable packaging will likely be a very small percentage of the overall material that's processed. It will be a difficult one to measure, and so we'll want to think about how do we make that work with compost facilities in a way that doesn't become overly burdensome. So I think we would look at these ones as mostly let's develop an approach and a measurement approach and the actual goals themselves within the program plan, and then move from there.
Yeah. Michael?
I think we also want to be highly aware of the availability of certain things like PCR. And, in general, the infrastructure of recycling is so poor that many of these products aren't even available as PCR. If you look at thin films and other things like that, we can't get enough supply to be able to produce the amount of PCR material that's demanded to try to accomplish sustainability goals as it is. So understanding the actual supply of these materials is critical to putting forth some type of a requirement. If you can't get it, how can you ever comply?
Yeah. Thank you for that. Martha?
Yeah, it seems to me that this list of, I don't know if there's an opportunity to augment this list, but what their report should be in line with the legislative intent. And there is very strong language in legislative intent about reducing packaging, especially plastic packaging. And I'm just wondering if it's possible in regulation to insert something about reducing the amount of plastic packaging, for example, or, you know, in general, you know, some measures that that reflect more completely the legislative intent.
Yeah, and
I mean, some of them are there. I mean, most of them are consistent. I'm just saying that there's some that are missing.
yeah, and that's something that we can take a look at. Are there more things that we can add in regulation? But these would be the
Reporting.
minimum
for
one right
reporting.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And is there a difference between reporting, just reporting, or meeting goals, and having those actually be compliance goals as well? So that's going to be another part of the conversation.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. Andrew, I think, is your hand still up from previously?
No, I wanted to make a comment here in terms of the structure of the statute. If you go higher up in the statute, these are elements that are required to be included in the pro plan. So I think the statute is very clear that this is what the pro will propose, that obviously is approved by the advisory council and is approved by the department. But in terms of adding additional elements or setting elements in regulation, the statute here is very clear that this is a plan element that then will go through the approval process. So I believe this must start with the pro's proposal, similar to Colorado.
Yeah, and I think I don't think we're there yet, but I think there is some language in there, and it might not necessarily be related to goals, but where MDE or other information required by MDE. I think that language is somewhere in there.
Yeah, other information, I believe, but I'm not aware of language to require additional goals.
Yeah, so we would just have to take a look at that. Does that allow the ability to add goals, or is it specific? So that's something that we would be looking at as well. Michael.
Sure, Brad, thanks. Yeah, so I want to build on that comment. I think one of the things we have to do is to make sure that as we go on this journey, that we're dealing with the facts as it relates to our situation. And we have only for now one PRO. I think it will be important to have them, I just want to build on last comment, to have them come up with a proposal that is consistent with this outline. Once we get that, we can then discuss it. If there are other things we need to add, that'll be part of the conversation as well. But I think it'd be best to have Peter, you and CAA to come up with some, recommendations along with this legislative intent before even we do anything.
All right. Andrew, I think your hand is still up, so I think Peter's next. Yeah. And you're on mute too.
Oh, if we go just down to one, just down to Roman numeral 5, just slightly down. No. Just if you scroll.
Roman numeral.
Waste reduction in 5. We need to measure waste reduction, and it's just not defined. So I don't know what it means. I think this is meant to deal with refill, but it's not defined at all in the legislation. So maybe something you want to define, because I'm not sure I understand what we're measuring.
Refill or reuse.
But reuse is, we're required to measure reuse separately because it says waste reduction and reuse. And I'm not totally sure. How do we measure refill? Like, are we measuring a water fountain? So there's just there's just difficulty in trying to measure refill. I'm not sure anyone has a great way to do it yet. But if there's a clear definition on that, if that does just mean refill, then that would be helpful for us to know.
Okay. Yeah, my team is, just so everyone knows, my team is also taking notes on this as well. Chaz?
Was waste reduction defined in the bill?
I don't think it is.
Because, so in other words, they're trying to nail Jello to a wall. It may be one of these well-intended goals that is unachievable.
Well, if it's not defined in the bill, there's certainly opportunities to find it in regulation. And if this is something that the pro needs to put in their plan, it might be good to define it in regulation.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, so moving on right here, or were there any other questions or comments in the chat? I don't think so. Okay. So, moving on to exemptions right here. Are there any questions on proposals for exemptions from the performance targets? What are the scenarios where that can be considered for an exemption from the goal? Are there any goals for the curbside list? I think there's been some discussion on that, or is it broader than that? Probably going to get a lot of different comments on this one, but what are some people's thoughts on the exemptions? And this is, yeah, sorry. Okay. All right. If there's nothing on that, describing infrastructure investment and investment goals. And then there's some language in here about making sure that it'll be competitive and in a fair manner. Gaps in the system, which the needs assessment has us identified, and it sounds like some of the further work that CAA is going to be doing might be refining that as well. Is there any questions, comments on the infrastructure part of this plan? All right, so moving on. Oh, Mario?
Yeah, just real quick. How are you, or what's the thought on determining your competitive process, and what, like, was kind of the political climate on competitiveness, and ensuring that equity and fairness and all that kind of, like, what does that look like?
So I think some of the conversation with this in the legislation was just to make sure that there's a wide scope of investment, and it's not just at, let's say, just at the MRF or just benefiting one material, that there are multiple recycled materials that are getting benefit from this investment. So I think at a high level, that was some of the conversation that I remember in the legislative process. Any other comments on that? All right. Okay, so we did talk a little bit about how the program was going to be paid for. Again, this is the plan that's submitted in 2028. So this isn't necessarily talking about the startup cost right here. But are there any questions, concerns, things that we need to address in regulation around the fees that are going to be charged with this? And what are the other states doing in terms of how they are structuring fees? Maybe that's a good place to start. Peter?
Sorry, but how are other states setting fees? Is that what your question was?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, so most of the states allow for the program plan to establish the methodology that will be used to set the fees. And so those fees are, again, reviewed on an annual basis, but they're set based on a methodology that's established as part of the program plan. And usually that gets into, assessing, your administrative costs, your costs associated with collection and management of materials, and it assigns those costs specifically to individual materials.
Got it. So you said most states are allowing it to be put in the plan. What are the other states? Is that Maine that you're referring to? That isn't.
Sorry, I guess I was referring to initially in Minnesota. It looks like that will be, some of those initial fees will be based on an alternative approach on that side to assess costs, at least in the interim, based on gross revenue.
Okay, I see. Shoshana?
I was just going to say we have a preference for the California model where they are collecting a baseline supply data based on 2023, and they're going to be basing the fees off of that real data, whereas in Oregon, the fees were based on estimates, not based on real producer data. So I think it's really important that how we set our fees are grounded in the reality of what's coming into the state.
Now, just clarification on that. When the fees are set, is that in regulation or is that proposed by the pro to be reviewed by the advisory council and then approved by the state?
It was proposed by the pro.
Okay.
In their program plan. And in Oregon, there was the understanding in the program plan that the fees that were in there were an estimate and that they would be finalized after producer reporting closed in March. And it was, in our viewpoint, a very rushed process that has led to some strife on the producer side. So once again, time and having it being based on real data.
Got it. Okay. So the fees should be based off of real data in the near past is what it sounds like is the comment.
Yes.
Okay. Peter, I think you had your hand up and then.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think what's being referred to is in Oregon, as part of the program plan, because the program plan was due before supply data was submitted. We needed to estimate based on data that the pro had available, but the methodology was always set up to be based on actual data. So yeah, the idea is that it's, the methodology works into the actual supply data for how the pro sets its fees.
Got it. All right, Michael.
Just a quick question. If the goal here is to incentivize the right behaviors and charge fees based on the difficulty level of disposal, how much data does Maryland have in understanding the level of difficulty? If we're going to assign fees based on how hard it is to get rid of something, then how much data do we have to be able to set the hierarchy of fees that says this is very difficult in the state of Maryland, and thus it is penalized harder than this because our infrastructure is strong, whether it's paper or PET or something of a much more mature basis. How good is our data to understand how we would assess or assign or create a hierarchy of those fees?
Yeah, and I think what this is talking about is the base fee, and then those fees get into what you were talking about, like what incentives and goals do you want to see? Those are going to be done through eco-modulation. So if you're doing certain activities, you could potentially reduce your fees, and if you're not doing certain activities, your fees may raise as a result of that. All right. Any other questions, comments on the fees? I guess Peter B. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. The only thing I haven't heard discussion is the concept of free riders. I think once it's clear what reporting is required to producers and a producer still doesn't sign up and participate in the program, it's important to have clear enforcement against such free riders. As an example, I know what was discussed by CAA with regards to Oregon. Their initial estimate when it came to paper products was off by an order of a magnitude of 3. It was 300% higher, and that was attributed primarily to newspaper and other paper producers that had not signed up to the program in Oregon. So being able to have clear enforcement, I think, is critical. And as an example, the state of Washington has one of the most clear clauses in their act, and talks about the fact that ecology must initiate enforcement against non-compliant producers that are not members of a PRO. Once you're down the road, once you have clearly defined who needs to be members of a PRO, have gone through reporting, and you still have entities that aren't participating.
So just be clear, ecology, is that the equivalent of the Maryland Department of the Environment in Washington?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. And it sounds like that they have an obligation to enforce. There's not enforcement discretion.
That's correct. They're probably the clearest with regards to that.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, Peter, the other Peter?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to mention just briefly. I mean, there's a bunch of things in here that are just small edits or issues. So post-consumer materials, I'm assuming that the state only wants, sorry, that was under 5. If you go up a little bit, Brad. Oh, no, down, nope. Keep going. Yeah, monitor to ensure the post-consumer materials are delivered to responsible end markets. So I'm assuming that's covered materials, but it's not set out that way. So it just a small.
No, that's a good covered materials that are post-consumer, maybe.
It just doesn't clearly define. We're talking
Yeah.
about what the PRO is responsible for, not all materials.
Okay, yeah, that's yeah, we have a note on that. Thank you for pointing that out. Shoshana?
I just want to bring it back to the free riders problem. I know that was brought up of maybe newspapers not reporting or not registering. And I just want to say, like, all of our members, the folks in the paper supply chain, are complying with the laws. I think there was a problem with overestimating the supply data in Oregon that led to these higher fees. So I don't want to misconstrue and putting blame on a certain producer group for fees being higher. So just want to level that playing field.
Yeah, and just a comment on that. The issue with free riders comes up a lot. That's something that we're going to be taking very seriously. Just on newsprint, there is an exemption up above, which we talked about at our last meeting. But yeah, if your material is in scope, that's definitely something that we want to make sure that producers are registering if they're not exempt. Chaz?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Just one more thing. We are as concerned about free riders as anyone else, and we want to make sure that everyone is paying into the system and doing their part. And it's incredibly important that we have the proper channels and mechanisms to ensure that folks are complying.
Yeah. Good conversation, Chaz.
Peter, I'm curious what your experience is on where the free rider problem is the biggest.
Well, I think, part of, what Shoshana was talking about, and I think we've talked about already, is, the pro is making estimates to start with based on the data that it has available. Data that it has available is, a lot of it is potentially waste composition audits that are done. And, when we talked about paper products earlier, it's difficult based on some of the data that we get to know are those included paper products or are those not included paper products? And so, we need to get the proper information out to producers so they understand what their obligations are under the act. And I think we haven't necessarily, when it comes to free riders, I think we're still working with producers to ensure that they're informed about what their obligations are. So I don't think there's an area specifically that we would say, but we do need to make sure that the guidance is very clear with producers well in advance so they understand what their actual obligations are.
Okay, maybe I'll rephrase my question. I sort of under the impression that in the past, at least, e-commerce has caused a lot of free riders. And I know we have a lot of exemptions in the system for which undoubtedly those packages or covered materials will be collected, but the individual producer is exempt by size or whatever from paying. How serious a problem is that?
I think, to be honest with you, some of the bigger e-commerce companies have been some of the best in a way of reporting and paying into the system. So I don't necessarily know if it's an e-commerce issue. Chaz, I think there's been a fair amount of work to focus on that area to make sure that they understand their obligations and get them in. So I think there's a fair amount of compliance that's happening on that side. With the entrance into the US, I think we're going to learn over the next couple of years where the problem spots are and how to make sure that we ensure that those producers understand what their obligations are. And so we've got a team of people that has focuses in different sectors to make sure that we're covering all of those off and capturing those companies. There's a lot of work underway on that side to get everybody onboarded.
Yeah, and our law does talk about or has a component of e-commerce in the producer definition, I believe. So I do know e-commerce in other programs and in other states has proved issues, especially getting in contact with the whoever the producer is. And if you're going through a marketplace, sometimes it's not obvious who the who the producer is or what that contact information is. But yeah, that's when we're definitely going to be looking at e-commerce and when we're going through this as well. Yeah, and Shannon just put the reference to if folks want to go back to that. All right. Moving on right here. So anything else on what needs to be included in the plan, what needs to be clarified? We have some items on labor standards right here. Talking about staffing, public outreach, education, and communication. So that's going to be a crucial part of this law right here. Peter, I know I've sat in on one of the Colorado talks that CAA put in recently, and they were talking about one of their ad campaigns that they were doing, and some of the other stuff that they were doing. So what is CAA doing to try around the education side of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're looking to, in many ways, create a repository of or templates that are adaptable to different circumstances within the states that we're operating in, knowing that there are different challenges and issues, and those local governments or service providers better understand those types of situations. So we're trying to provide some standardized materials that are adaptable and allow those producers to use those materials. We're looking at partnering with different types of organizations, at least in Colorado, service providers, nonprofits, local communities that are best suited to be able to get the information out to consumers. And we're looking at multiple platforms to get that information out, whether that be in paper, in advertisements, through radio or otherwise, or through social media. So I think we're looking at a number of mediums and a number of approaches to be able to get that information out to residents.
All right. Any other comments on the communication side of this?
Just one thing, Brad, is I think you referred to packaging materials, which I think is a holdover. It's under 4A. That's a holdover from previous language. So probably doesn't matter too much, but again, packaging materials isn't defined.
Oh yeah, because packaging materials was just changed to packaging, I think. And then that's because covered materials kind of replaced that. Okay, that's a good.
Just house more than anything, but yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's in a couple of places where there's still an old reference, but
okay. Yeah, and that might be something that we might be able to address in regulation. Packaging materials means this, or so that's probably something that we can address. All right. Michael.
Just a comment that I think this is as important as anything that we've talked about so far. We spend a tremendous amount of time trying to help our customers educate their customers. And if we fall short on this, then all of this work and trying to get the right things into the right buckets for recycling or whatever their intended end of life is will be all for naught. We'll have, and a lot of that burden and labor will go right to the MRFs, and we'll end up sorting things like we already do now. There's so much confusion and greenwashing in the industry that I know that the ultimate consumer is incredibly confused by what to do with their trash. So I think this part and the engagement around this is as important as anything we talked about so far.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
And their point needs to have a
don't
very
know what-
strong strategy and structure. And I heard Peter's comments, but much more intentionality than newspapers and radios and social has to be very intentional in how that's done.
Yeah, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Okay, so the next item in here is the reimbursements for service providers. And I know we do have some service providers that are on this call. And just wanted to open up what needs to be clarified in an ideal world. How would those reimbursements work? I do know later we do have to, the state has to develop a registration process for folks to be reimbursed in the first place. So want to open it up. What are some things that, because this is going to be a very important part of the process in terms of providing that much needed funding for the recycling infrastructure. Peter?
Can I just ask, what is sub 4 meant to do? The process for providing reimbursement for multiple brands of covered material. What does that mean? Does that mean, like, I'm not sure I understand what it's meant to do.
I might turn, since this is not underlined right here, I think this might have come initially from Ameripin. Is someone from Ameripin still on the call? Andrew?
Yeah, so sorry, multitasking, bring me back to where we are at this point, and I can try to comment.
Yeah. So we're looking under this section right here. Describe the process by which a service provider may request reimbursement, essentially for these activities. And then number 4, there was the question on the process for providing reimbursement for multiple brands of covered materials. And the question was, what does this mean for multiple brands? And since this wasn't underlined, I think this was initially came from Ameripin right here. And if you recall the conversation, but I could be wrong, but just wanted to see if you recall the conversation around this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's consistent somewhat with the Minnesota statute. And the process itself, I mean, largely would have to flow from I think the pro in addressing multiple brands.
So is that a producer that has multiple brands with multiple covered materials?
Yeah, and trying to consolidate ownership of multiple brands into one company submission is, I think, the goal here.
But this is reimbursement to service providers, not to brands, unless the brand is also a service provider, I guess.
No, and that probably wouldn't happen. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe it's also a conversation with Minnesota on how they are handling this as well.
Yes, I believe this is consistent. I'll go back after this and check. And so, yeah, some of that language was included in the Minnesota statute, pulled into this draft, obviously the statute, and there may have been other reasons for it in Minnesota. So,
yeah, and we'll definitely follow up with Mallory on this as well. So
great. Yep, happy to help in that too, in any way I can.
Okay. Cool. All right. There's also this, I know we've talked about this before, but there's this arbitration part of the reimbursement process. Any comments, questions, concerns around this item? All right. Cool. So moving on. So there is a process for addressing written recommendations from the advisory council and how they were considered and addressed in the development of the plan. So there is an opportunity for the advisory council to provide some input on this. If there's no comments on that, I'll move on. Here is the reference. Include any other information that is required by the department, which is pretty broad. And so that's something that we'll have to take a look at. All right. So we have performance goals do not apply in these situations. These three situations. Any questions on where the goals would not apply? Okay.
Brad, does that mean those packages are exempt? The goals just don't apply.
So what I think this means is they're still covered materials that would still have to, well, we'll have to, if there's not already another exemption for them. But it's just the goals they wouldn't be subject to the goals, if I'm reading that correctly. Peter, I know you've probably delved into this. Is that your interpretation on that as well?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
But this will impact us to some degree in setting targets because we don't know how much of this material is supplied into the marketplace. But
yeah. Okay. All right.
But ironically enough, their weight would still be in the data for meeting the goals because it's not going to be subtracted from what's been collected.
Sorry, say it more.
We can move on. I may just ask you a question separately. It's a weird provision. Not that weird provisions aren't littered in this law.
And I guess the question is are they still paying into the system, but they just don't have goals? So that's, yeah, that's something that we'll have to take a look at too.
But their collected packaging still gets counted towards meeting overall goals.
It could. So yeah.
So it's a nice way to kind of puff up the numbers by not very much for 5 years.
So I think this actually came up at the PSI, and maybe Shannon, you have, if you can jump in because the conference just happened.
Yeah, I'll just provide that the commentary associated with this was that, you know, the packaging associated with some of these materials has been thoroughly vetted by various different federal agencies. And so modifying that could have a unintended consequence associated with excessive food waste due to the fact that these materials have been so closely monitored for so long and are providing protection of perishable food items. that have very tight shelf life. So for example, like as an example, the discussion on here was like the one comment that was brought up that was really specific would be if you were to go into a grocer and the base container was a clear container versus a black container, but that the film on top is consistent and has protection. Having the black plastic versus clear plastic as a base could be changed and modified, but not necessarily the overall delivery of those materials. If I'm explaining this correctly to what you're answering your question, Chaz, this is the specific unintended consequence. You can change that color to ensure that there's more recyclable content and more valuable content that could come from it. But the overall material protection to ensure that there's long shelf life would remain the same. Hopefully I've answered your question.
No, but what it is just a provision that got slipped in to protect somebody for a while. I get that. Happens all the time in legislation. We'll just see how it works out over 5 years.
Yeah. Peter?
I think this came up during the consultation process. I think the intent was to keep those producers would still pay in, but the materials would be removed from the target, from the performance target. So my understanding was from when we met on this and the submission that was brought forward by some of the organizations was they would still pay into the system.
Yeah, my guess is it's a pretty insignificant amount in the scheme of things. We're not talking game changer here.
Yeah. Okay, so the next item, aligning the goals with the needs assessment, which again, the scope of the needs assessment is a little bit different than what made it into law. So we'll have to take a look at that and see and look at it, what we can do with what actually was fleshed out in the law. All right. The financing method. So this is the methodology for reimbursements right here. So I know there's been some questions on this 50% date right here, because it is before the money starts flowing in. So just wanted to open up. Are there any thoughts on how we address this 50% date right here for cost per ton on or before July 1st, 2028?
I think at this point, that's something that people really need to think through.
Peter?
Sorry, Bradley, I'm just, are there any options to deal with it if the date is before the program implements? I'm assuming it doesn't apply. Am I wrong in that thinking?
Well, would there be opportunities for retroactive payments? That's probably something that we could take a look at. So as long as we have folks that are registered and are able to receive payments and there are receipts for that time frame, I guess, is there an opportunity to do retroactive payments? So when the funding does come in, then if the activity happened in on or before July 1st, 2028. And that may not be the way to go as well, but just wanted to put that out there.
So, and sorry, I read these laws somewhat literally in some extent. So are you suggesting that potentially the department has the ability to charge retroactive fees back to producers before the program plan has been approved?
Well, this wouldn't.
It's an important clarification, so we know.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something that we have to take a look at as well to see if that is possible. So yeah, Shoshana.
Hi, something retroactive fees sound very concerning, and we would want to make sure that there's very clear reasons why and a legislative capacity and ability to do something like that. And Peter, I'm just wondering what level of complication that might add to this.
Lots.
Yeah.
I guess I'm also trying to understand if a private service provider is operating at that point, are they going to hold that cost and not charge their customer for any cost during that period of time?
Yeah.
Or are we paying them twice? Or I guess once, but the consumer's paying them the other time. Are the residents paying them?
Yeah, so there's and that's a good point as well. So that's something that we would have to would have to work through.
Brad, is this the glitch in the law with the payments coming before the plan is approved or even submitted?
Yeah.
So what we're dealing with here is functionally an impossibility if the producer does not have potentially a submitted or approved plan, but the producer is also supposed to make a payment. Correct?
So it's, let me just, so it's the same day the plan is submitted. So that's the issue, is that these costs are 50% of these costs per ton are being covered, but it's before the plan is actually approved. So the question is, what exactly are those costs? Are there going to be changes to the plan as a result of that? So it'd be difficult to assess what those costs are going to be.
Yeah, it was a drafting error made in a rush to judgment to get this thing passed, correct? Nobody did this intentionally, it just happened. So what you're asking is, how do we fix this problem?
Yes.
Peter, any thoughts? Because I think y'all are in kind of a bind if you had to make payments without an approved plan.
I think there's a lot of issues with this. I would assume, I mean, my assumption has been that we would just simply skip, because the 50% wouldn't apply for 2028 because the 2029 date would come into play. Based on how the legislation's written right now, I mean, I guess you could amend the legislation to just change each of the dates a year forward, but.
Yeah, I think you could skip, but that might not survive a lawsuit if someone is stupid enough to sue.
All right. I'm sure we could spend a lot of time on this one. This is probably one of the more questions we get on this law, and we'll have to address it somehow. But I'm going to move on just in the interest of time. Actually, I think we are out of time. I did want to open up the invitation. If anybody wants to join my team on our site visits, when we are going out to these retailers, I know Trash Free Maryland has expressed interest, because I think it would be really useful to actually go out and see what we're seeing. And if we're going to be developing the covered materials list, then we just wanted to open up the invitation to go out to and do some of these site visits with us. And it might prompt some additional conversations. So if you're interested in that, just send me an email after the fact, and we can get some of those site visits scheduled. All right, and as always, we end with public comment. Is there anybody can someone put my email in the chat as we're going through this? Okay, Shannon did. All right. Is there anybody in the public that wants to make a comment? Okay. Hearing none. It is 10:58. So at our next meeting, I think CAA is planning on doing a presentation on best management practices that they're seeing in the other states. And we're not completely through with this. So we may want to consider continuing this conversation. And if folks have comments on what needs to be clarified in regulation, you can certainly send those to us, but I would also ask that you send those to the advisory council as well, just so that everyone on this group is seeing the things, so that we can that the input that is coming in, so that we can have a discussion on those. So again, thank you everyone for your time. I know it's very busy and we have a lot to do, and I appreciate the conversation.
Thanks, Brad, and thanks everyone. Have a wonderful day.
All right. Have a nice weekend. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.